Welcome to your very first JavaScript video. In this one, we're going to learn about two really important fundamental features of JavaScript, the variable and the string. This is going to get us headed in the right direction. It's going to enable us to explore more and more features and actually figure out how we can write JavaScript and do useful things with it. So to kick things off in this video and in most videos for this section, we're going to create a new file, a new space to explore a specific feature of the language. In this one, I'm going to make a new file right in the basics folder called strings.js. And in here, we're going to mess around with some code where we learn a little bit about variables and strings, and then it'll be challenge time. So what you'll do is complete a task I give you on your own. We'll walk through the solution together. So that's the general flow we're going to follow in these early videos. This is going to make sure that you learn the fundamentals, but that you can also actually use them. That's why the challenges are so important. All right, that's enough intro stuff. Let's go ahead and dive into some code. We're going to talk about the JavaScript variable first. A variable is a way to store a value for later. So we're going to have files that have multiple lines in them. We might want to store a value and access it later in the program. And this could be useful for a ton of different situations. It's such a core feature, we're going to use it in every single script we write. Imagine we're creating an application that allows users to sign up. They enter their email and their password. We store those in variables, and then we can access those values and do meaningful things with them, like check if the email is already used or if the password has a length greater than 9. So let's go ahead and create our first variable, and then it'll be a little easier to see why something like this would actually be useful. To create a variable in JavaScript, we do have to follow the JavaScript syntax for this, and the syntax of the language is just the rules that govern what you can type in a JavaScript file. I can't type anything I want inside of here. We have to follow the language conventions, and that's exactly what we're going to be learning. So as we go through the course and we use these features more and more, you'll get more comfortable writing things inside of your files. For now, though, we're going to start by creating a very simple variable, and the first thing we have to do is type let. Now, let is what's known as a reserved keyword in JavaScript. It's part of the language, and it has a special meaning to it. When JavaScript runs through our files and sees let, it's going to know that we're trying to create a variable. Now we type a space after let, and this is where we name our variable. What are we storing? Are we storing a book title? Are we storing the password? We're storing something, so we have to give it a name. In this case, let's go ahead and actually store our name. So right here, I'm going to name the variable name, N-A-M-E. Now after the variable name, we use the equals sign. So we are letting name equal something. We can actually read that like a sentence. Let name equal, and then right here, this is where we put the value. Now this value could come from anywhere. Later on in the course, we're going to see how a value could come from the user typing something in the browser. We could have it come from a mobile device. We could have it come from pretty much any data source out there. For now though, we're just going to type a static value in. Right here, we're going to create a string. So we've actually already used strings. We used a string over here in Hello World. This thing right here that I have highlighted, this is a string. A string starts with a single quote and ends with a single quote. And what do we put inside? We put inside anything that we like. Inside of here, we can type any characters for whatever we're trying to represent. Maybe I'm trying to represent a book, so I could put something like ego is the enemy, a book on my bookshelf. Maybe I'm trying to represent my name, so I could type my name in, Andrew Mead. And what goes inside of the string doesn't need to conform to any special rules. You can put whatever value you need to store inside of here. So for the moment, let's just stick with this. We're going to put our full name inside of those single quotes. We have our first variable name, whose value is the string Andrew Mead. Let's go ahead and actually do something with it, and we're going to do that down below. We can do it on line 2, but just for the sake of readability, I'm going to add an extra line and do it on line 3, although the code would be exactly the same if I didn't have the extra line. What we're going to do here is just use console.log to print the value to the screen. We're not going to explore the exact details of the console.log and parentheses. We're going to go ahead and cover that in the next section when we talk about JavaScript functions. For now, all we're going to know is that whatever we put inside of those parentheses ends up getting printed to the screen. Later on, instead of just printing things to the terminal, we will actually render things to the browser where the user can see them. But this is going to be a great way to get started with the basics. Right here, let's go ahead and add that. Console.log We add those parentheses, and we saw that if we put a string inside of there, we got that printing. Well, we already have a string. It's just stored on a variable. So how do we get Andrew Mead to print? We need to reference this variable to get its value. How do we do that? We just type the variable name wherever we want to use it. In our case, we want to use the string right here. So inside of parentheses, I'm just going to type name. Now we can actually run our strings file for the very first time and see what happens. Over in the terminal, that would be node space strings.js. And what do I get when I run this script? I get Andrew Mead printing successfully, and then I get brought back to the command prompt. It's asking me to run another command. So there we have it. We created our very first variable, and this reads like a sentence. Let name equal Andrew Mead. When we print name, we get Andrew Mead. Now that we got the basics down with a simple example, let's explore something slightly more complex. Imagine we had separate variables, one for the first name and one for the last name, and we wanted to combine them to create a full name, which would just be the first name with a space in between and then the last name. How would we get that done? Well, we can explore that by deleting everything in this file and building up from scratch. I'm going to start by creating a first name variable. Let first name equal the string Andrew. Now, for the very first time, the code we've typed in actually doesn't conform to the JavaScript syntax. That's because variable names cannot have a space inside of them. But what I do want to show you is what happens if we were to run the program in its current state, because you might see the screen we're about to see if you make a typo as you're moving through the course. So what I'm going to do is save the file in its broken state, and I'm going to rerun it. Node strings.js. What do I get when I rerun it? I get a really long output with a whole bunch of cryptic characters. So let's go ahead and break this down. This is a JavaScript error. On the very first line of this error, it shows us the exact file that's causing it, strings.js, in my basics folder, in the bootcamp folder on the desktop. And it also shows me the line. It's on line 1. Right here, we get the actual code, our code that's causing the problem, and it's pointing right to name with these little arrows. And then we have the error message down below. Syntax error, unexpected identifier. So our variable name identifier is not valid. It has a space in between. We need to fix that. We can remove this error by just adjusting what it's talking about. We can remove the space, and now we have a valid program. Now, when you do have a variable name with multiple words, it's common convention to use what's known as camel casing. That's where we start off the first letter of each word with a capital letter, except for the first word. So in this case, the first word is first. We leave that lowercase. The next word is name. We uppercase the first letter to make it a little easier to parse with the eyes. And then if we were to have another word like other, name, other, it would look a little bit like this. In our case, though, we're just going to stick with first name since we only need 2 words for the variable name. Now we create last name. Let last name equal the string our last name. And what we're going to do from here is create a variable full name. Let full name equal, what's it going to equal? Well, we want to use values from first name and last name. How do we get a value from a variable? We just reference the variable by its name. So let's start by grabbing first name. From here, we're going to go ahead and actually print full name, and we'll finish off line 3 in just a little bit. Down below, console.log, in parentheses, full name. Now we have a completely valid script, so if I save things, the program should run without printing a really long error message. Right here, I run it, and I get Andrew, which is expected. First name equals Andrew. I then say full name equals first name, which means that full name equals Andrew. I print full name, and I get Andrew. Now, how would I combine those two? Well, let's start by combining them without a space. If you have 2 strings and you want to combine them, you use the plus operator. This is the plus sign. So I have one string on the left plus another string on the right. In this case, on the right, I want last name. This operator is known as the concatenation operator, and that's just a fancy word for saying, hey, put this thing on the end of this thing. We're just combining 2 strings. Now if we run the program, we can see the output of using that concatenation operator. Over here, what do I get? I get Andrew Mead printing, but you notice that there is no space in between. So what we want to do is add a space right in between the W and the M. We can do that by either creating a variable whose value is a space, but we could also just define a string right in line. So right here, I can say first name plus, I can then add a new string, and then I can add plus onto that. Now, what do I want for this new string? Well, I don't want it to be empty. That would result in exactly what we're seeing here. I want a space. So I'll type a space in and save the program. And now full name equals the first name Andrew plus our space plus the last name Mead. And if I were to run the script, we should get what we had earlier in the course. Right here, Andrew space Mead prints to the screen. You should be seeing your first name with a space and then your last name. It's important to notice that we were able to use a combination of inline strings like this one defined right here and variables whose values were strings. So we could have defined Andrew right here instead of first name. The string Andrew, this would work, but the goal was to work with variables, so we referenced first name instead. Both are fine because the inline string Andrew and the variable first name store the exact same value. If you worked with a little bit of JavaScript before taking this course, you might have worked with JavaScript where each statement had a semicolon at the end. So that would look like this. I'd add one here on line 2, here on line 3, and then on line 5. So we're using semicolons to terminate our statements. In JavaScript, semicolons are optional, so we can actually rely on automatic semicolon insertion. That is why our code earlier actually worked with no semicolons in place. It is also perfectly fine to add semicolons into the file. Right here, for example, I can save strings.js with the semicolons in place. Over in the terminal, we can then go ahead and run things. So I am going to run the file again. And when I do, what do I get? I get the exact same result. So the program's functionality hasn't changed. I'll have a bit more to say about semicolons as we move through the class, but semicolons, as we've just seen, are completely optional, so we're going to go ahead and remove the ones that were manually added in. Now that we've messed around with variables and strings just a little bit, I want to move on to our very first challenge to wrap up this video. All the videos in this course, well, about 90% of them, they're going to have a challenge. This is a time for you to solve a problem on your own using what you learned in the video. So here's how the flow is generally going to go. I'm going to start by setting up the challenge. I'll never tell you to pause the video and solve something without telling you what I want you to do. There's always a very specific goal in mind. After I tell you what I'd like you to do, I'm going to give you a chance to pause the video and go off and do it. That's where you're going to write some code, you're going to run the code and make sure the output works, you're going to experiment, you're going to fix any errors you might have made in your program. This thing might take a little time in the beginning because the mistakes you make are going to be a little harder to solve. But don't get discouraged, because as you work with the language more and as we write more code, you're going to make less errors and you're going to solve those errors quicker than you did in the past. So it's really important to take that time, actually pause the video and try to solve the problem using what you learned. If you can get it, great. If you can't, that's great too. I don't expect perfection. It's all about putting yourself out there and trying to solve the problem. After you're done with your attempt, we're going to go through the solution together. You click play and I'd show you exactly how I would have solved the problem. So let's go ahead and set up our very first challenge. Your job is to use variables, strings, and string concatenation to solve a problem similar to this one. So I'm going to switch over to my text editor and add a quick outline as to what I'd like you to do. You're going to be making 3 variables: city, country, and location. The city is going to be the string value of your city, and same for country, the string value of your country. Location is going to be a combination of the two. It is going to be the city with the country tacked on to the end and a comma space in between. So I'm in Philadelphia, United States. The final output for me should be Philadelphia, comma space, United States. So we're going to use string concatenation when we create location, just like we use it when we create full name up above. Then the final thing you're going to do is print the location. The end result for my values would be something like this. Your values will look slightly different. So take some time to delete everything in strings.js and try to solve this problem. Create those 3 variables, use concatenation, and try to print the end result. Take a moment to pause the video, and when you're done, click play. All right, how'd that one go? Hopefully you were able to get things at least started, whether or not they worked successfully. We're just learning the challenge format as well, so it might not have been clear exactly what I expected of you. As we go through more and more challenges, you'll get more into the idea of a challenge. All right, I'm gonna kick things off by creating those three variables. The first one would be city. Let city equal the string with my city, Philadelphia. Then country. Let country equal my country, United States. And then the last variable I wanted you to create was location. Let location, which is a combination of the two with a comma and a space in between. If we want to start with city, I reference city first. If I want to add a comma and a space after city, I use the concatenation operator and I add in the string I want to concatenate on. In this case, comma, space. Now, what do I want to wrap up my string with? The country. So I use the concatenation operator again, and I reference the variable country where I store that string. So I've successfully combined these three strings into one superstring, and then I'm going to print that string out. Console.log, inside of parentheses, whatever we want to print, location, and now we can go ahead and run the program. Over in the terminal, I'm going to use clear to clear the terminal output, node strings.js. Right here, I run the script, I get Philadelphia, United States printing. And there we have it. That is our very first challenge complete. Hopefully you were able to complete that one without too much trouble. The challenges are going to get a bit harder over time. As we learn more about the language, I'll expect more and create slightly more complex challenges. But for now, this was plenty complex as an introduction, our very first one. Don't forget, there is a PDF companion for this course, which contains notes for every single lecture where we learned something. We learned something in this one, so the notes for this lecture talk about creating variables, strings, and string concatenation. There is also a zip download for each lecture, which contains the code we wrote. So if something's not working for some reason, you can always download the exact code I just wrote out, and you can compare it to your code. That is it for this first video. We're going to continue on in the next one by talking about numbers in JavaScript.